Human hands tore into alien flesh like claws through paper. Lieutenant Kyle Miller ripped the cruel pilot out of its shattered cockpit with a triumphant roar. The horrific bug creature hit the ground with a crunch, green guts splattering over Kyle's combat boots, as the towering human warrior stood tall over his vanquished foe. Just heartbeats earlier, the massive, cruel war mech had Riemann soldier Raxa and his battered platoon pinned down, plasma beams slicing through their ranks like an industrial laser through styrofoam. Crimson blood pooled in the dirt as Raxa's troops fell one by one, mowed down by the relentless metal monstrosity. The stench of burning flesh filled Raxa's nose, the cries of his dying comrades ringing in his ears. This was supposed to be a simple mission. Breach the enemy compound, secure the outpost, await reinforcements. General Verak had promised aid was inbound from some primitive race Raxa had barely heard of before. Humans, Verak called them, as if these pitiful aliens could turn the tide against the ruthless insectoid Krul. Then Kyle arrived and all hell broke loose. The human warrior moved like a tempest unchained, his limbs a whirlwind of destruction. He scaled the war mech's hull in seconds, fingers and boots finding impossible purchase on its metal skin. Raxa could only watch in slack-jawed awe as this human laid waste to the deadliest weapon in the Krul's arsenal. With strength and savagery Raxa thought impossible for an unaugmented being to possess. In that moment, Raxa understood. If the human reinforcements failed to break the Krul line, the Riemann Empire would fall, and trillions would perish under the insectoid's cruel reign. But if humanity fought with even a fraction of Lieutenant Kyle Miller's unrelenting ferocity, there was still hope. Hope that the Raymonds may see another dawn. The human soldier turned to Raxa, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. He spoke, his voice a guttural growl that made Raxa's plates clatter. "Heard you boys needed some help." Raxa nodded curtly at Kyle's words, trying to mask the wound to his ego. "We shall see what the human forces are made of soon enough." As the Riemann soldiers checked their weapons and applied field dressings to their injuries, Kyle's comm unit crackled to life. "Lieutenant Miller, massive cruel force inbound to your location. Counterattack imminent. Link up with Badger Squad at nav point E69 and hold position." "Copy that, Overlord. Miller out." Kyle turned to Raxa. "You hear that? We've got bug backup dancers on the way. You in or out?" Raxa's scales bristled. Every instinct screamed not to trust this arrogant human, but the Krul would slaughter his depleted platoon. "We have a saying, human. Better to sup with a trickster than sleep with the worms. We will join you. For now." The human and Riemann troops moved swiftly, taking up defensive positions amidst the ancient trees and weathered stones. Combat engineers deployed portable barricades and gun nests. Heavy weapons teams hauled railguns and rocket launchers into place. Then came the rumble, low and deep, like an earthquake's first shivers. Raxa peered through his macro binoculars and froze. Cruel soldiers poured from the tree line, a living tide of chitin and hate, swarming over rocks and logs. Towering above them strode beetle-like tanks, their legs pulverizing everything in their path. Kyle flashed a savage smile and chambered a round in his pulse rifle. "Showtime, let's dance." The humans opened fire, and the jungle exploded. The vanguard of the cruel swarm vanished in a blaze of superheated plasma. Rockets and railgun slugs tore through the tank's armor like tissue paper. But the cruel kept coming. Warrior drones bounded forward on powerful legs, spraying the human lines with sizzling energy beams. Soldiers fell, bodies charred and pierced. Raxa fired and fired until his rifle clicked empty. He drew his monomolecular blade and charged, hacking and slashing. To his left and right, humans fought with a ferocity that stole his breath. They attacked with a swiftness and surety that seemed almost mechanical. Even as awe kindled in his breast, a cold dread gripped Raxa's hearts. What sort of beings were these humans, to battle with such merciless precision? What dark secrets lay behind their noble facade? Kyle and Raxor stood back to back amidst the chaos, plasma rifles spitting death at the onrushing cruel horde. The Riemann soldiers' shots struck with pinpoint accuracy, each searing beam punching through chitinous flesh. But Kyle fought like a man possessed, his combat blade flashing as he hacked and slashed with inhuman speed. Limbs flew and ichor splattered, the human's augmented strength turning the battle into a gory meat grinder. Yet for every insectoid warrior they cut down, 3 more surged forward to take its place. The Krul's numbers seemed inexhaustible. All around them, human and Riemann troops fell under the relentless onslaught, their agonized screams filling the jungle air. Raxa's hearts hammered against his ribcage as he slammed a fresh power cell into his rifle. "Fall back!" he barked into his comm unit. "Regroup at the secondary." A plasma bolt struck his shoulder, sending him staggering. The stench of charred flesh filled his nostrils. Raxa snarled in pain and ripped off the ruined shoulder plate, synthetic muscles sparking beneath. "We can't hold them!" Kyle shouted over the din of battle, his face splattered with cruel blood. "We have to—" The human's words cut off as an armored behemoth smashed through their lines, crushing soldiers beneath its clawed feet. The cruel tank loomed over them, its plasma cannon already glowing with deadly energy. Kyle's eyes locked with Raxa's, a silent message passing between them. They dove aside as the cannon fired, the superheated beam carving a molten trench in the earth where they'd stood a heartbeat before. Rolling to his feet, Kyle slapped a device on his wrist. Raxa hesitated, expecting some new weapon to materialize in the human's grip, but instead a swarm of metallic shapes detached from the dropships hovering above the canopy. The drones descended upon the Krul like avenging furies, lasers flashing and micro-missiles detonating in rippling chains of destruction. Chitin cracked and ichor sprayed as the machines tore into the insectoids with merciless efficiency. Raxa watched, slack-jawed, as the drones turned the tide of battle. The Krul faltered, then broke, scuttling back into the undergrowth as the relentless machines pursued. Silence fell over the blood-soaked clearing, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the sizzle of ruptured power cells. Kyle turned to Raxa, his mouth set in a grim line. "Not bad for a bunch of primitive aliens," the human remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Raxa bristled at the backhanded compliment, but nodded grudgingly. "Your tactics are unorthodox but effective. Perhaps there is more to your species than meets the eye." As the human and Riemann forces regrouped, tending to their injured and salvaging what equipment they could, whispers began to circulate among the Riemann ranks, murmurs of unease, of suspicion. "Did you see how they fought? Like machines, not living beings. I heard the humans have been watching us for cycles, waiting for the right moment to strike. What if this is all part of some plan? What if they're using us to weaken the Krul so they can swoop in and conquer both our races?" Raxa's unease grew with each passing moment. He had to know the truth. Pulling Kyle aside, he fixed the human with a hard stare. "What is your real purpose here, human? Why have you come to Zephyrus, and why aid us against the Krul?" Kyle's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Raxa glimpsed something dark and primal, lurking behind the human's cool exterior. "Our purpose," Kyle echoed, his voice low and menacing. "We're here to do what we always do, to fight, to conquer, and to survive. The Krul, the Riemanns. It makes no difference to us. In the end, there can be only one dominant species in the galaxy, and it won't be yours." Raxa stumbled back, his scales prickling with dread as Kyle's words sank in like venomous barbs. The human's true colors shone through, a ruthless conqueror cloaked in the guise of an ally, but before he could muster a retort, a shrill, eardrum-shattering screech rent the air. The jungle erupted in a frenzy of motion, trees splintering like matchsticks as a colossal form burst from the undergrowth. Raxa's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. It was a cruel queen, a sight few lived to tell of. Her exoskeleton pulsed with an otherworldly glow, her compound eyes cold and calculating as they fixed upon the battered human and Riemann forces. Kyle turned to face the towering insectoid, a smirk playing on his blood-flecked lips. "Well, well," he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. "Looks like the big bug herself has decided to join the party." The queen's mandibles clicked, a sound like sharpened blades slicing through bone. "Foolish human," she spat. her voice a guttural rasp that sent icy tendrils down Raxa's spine. "You think you can challenge the might of the cruel hive? We have seen the darkness in your hearts, the savagery that lurks beneath your civilized facade. You are no better than the feral beasts you claim to be." A harsh, mirthless laugh tore from Kyle's throat, echoing through the jungle like a death knell. "You're right," he admitted, his voice laced with malice. "We are beasts, but that's what makes us strong, that's what makes us survivors, and that's why we'll be the ones standing when the dust settles." With a wordless roar, Kyle charged, his weapon spewing searing beams of energy. The Queen's elite warriors surged to meet him, their razor-sharp claws glinting and acidic venom dripping from their maws. Raxa hesitated, torn between loyalty to his own kind and the growing terror of humanity's true nature. But as the Queen's warriors closed in, he steeled himself and leapt into the fray, his plasma blade flashing. The battle devolved into a whirlwind of slashing claws and sizzling plasma, the air thick with the stench of blood and charred chitin. Raxor fought with a desperate fury, his blade carving through the Queen's warriors like a scythe through wheat. But for every insectoid he felled, 2 more took its place, their numbers seemingly inexhaustible. The Queen lashed out with a massive barbed appendage, catching Kyle square in the chest. The human warrior flew back, his armor dented and sparking, but he staggered to his feet, a feral grin stretching across his blood-streaked face. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, spitting a globule of crimson onto the ground. The Queen reared up to her full height, her eyes blazing with hatred. "Your arrogance will be your downfall, beast," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "The cruel will never submit to your kind savage rule." As the Titans clashed once more, Raxa found himself fighting on autopilot, his mind reeling with the implications of humanity's presence. What secrets did these brutal warriors harbor, and what would their arrival mean for the delicate balance of power in the galaxy? The battle raged on, the jungle trembling beneath the onslaught of human fury and cruel savagery. Raxa ducked and wove, his blade a blur of motion as he carved a path through the seething mass of chitin and claws. Beside him, Kyle fought like a man possessed, his augmented strength and speed turning the tide against the cruel horde. But even as they pushed the insectoids back, Raxa couldn't shake the sense of unease that clawed at his mind. The humans were a force to be reckoned with, their technology and ferocity unmatched by any race he had encountered. And yet, beneath their noble facade, something dark and primal lurked, a hunger for conquest that threatened to consume all in its path. As the Queen's warriors fell back, their numbers dwindling under the relentless human assault, Raxa turned to Kyle, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is it you truly seek here, human?" he demanded, his voice raw with exertion. "Dominion over the galaxy, the subjugation of all other races." Kyle met his gaze, his eyes glinting with a feral light. "We seek only to survive," he replied, his voice low and menacing, "and if that means crushing anyone who stands in our way, then so be it." The Queen, her carapace cracked and oozing viscous green fluid, let out a piercing shriek of rage. She lunged forward, her barbed appendages flashing. The Queen's barbed appendage flashed, but Kyle ducked and rolled, the gleaming chitin whistling over his head. He came up firing, plasma bolts stitching a line of smoking craters across the Queen's thorax. She shrieked, a sound that made Raxor's teeth ache, and lunged, claws extended. Raxor whirled, narrowly avoiding a cruel warrior's slashing talons. His plasma blade hummed as it clove through the creature's armored hide, spilling viscous green ichor onto the churned earth. Another cruel loomed behind its fallen comrade, mandibles clacking, but before it could strike, a lance of searing energy drilled through its skull. The insectoid dropped, its exoskeleton smoldering. Raxor spun to see a hulking human warrior, clad in heavy armor, lowering a massive energy cannon. The newcomer nodded curtly before turning his weapon on the remaining cruel, unleashing a blistering barrage that tore through their ranks. All across the battlefield, human reinforcements poured from the shadows, their sleek armor and advanced weaponry cutting through the cruel like industrial lasers through plywood. Raxa realized with a start that the human forces he and Kyle had fought beside were a mere fraction of their true strength, a vanguard, nothing more. The cruel queen staggered under Kyle's relentless assault, her carapace cracked and oozing. The human commander's voice boomed over the din of battle, cold and inexorable. "Release the Reavers." From the bowels of the human dropships, a new nightmare emerged. Grotesquely augmented warriors, their bodies melded with cybernetic enhancements, pulsing with eldritch energy. These Reavers fell upon the cruel with a savagery that turned Raxa's stomach, their enhanced strength and speed, rendering them unstoppable juggernauts of flesh and metal. Even the queen, mighty as she was, could not withstand the onslaught. As her defenses crumbled, Kyle lunged, his armored fist shattering her thorax with a final devastating blow. The queen shuddered and collapsed, her once terrible form now a ruined husk. Raxa stood amid the carnage, his forces broken and scattered, numb horror settling over him like a shroud. The humans swept over the battlefield, Reavers prowling like feral beasts as they consolidated their victory. Kyle turned to Raxa, his armor drenched in the queen's ichor, eyes alight with savage triumph. "Do you see now, Riemann?" His voice was a menacing growl, dripping with malice. "This is the true face of humanity. We are the galaxy's apex predators, and we won't rest until all who defy us are ground to dust beneath our heels." Raxa's scales scraped against the cold metal floor as the human guards dragged him through the bowels of the ship. His arms ached from the restraints, the weight of defeat and despair hanging heavy upon his shoulders. The once proud Raymond warrior had been reduced to a mere prisoner, his fate now in the hands of his most hated enemy. The guards hauled Raxa into a dimly lit chamber, where the human commander awaited, flanked by Kyle and a contingent of heavily armed soldiers. The commander's face was a tapestry of scars, his eyes cold and calculating as they appraised the captured Riemann. "You fought well, Riemann," the commander admitted, his voice a gravelly rumble that echoed off the metal walls. "But your species' time is over. The Galactic Council has fallen, and the Riemann Empire is nothing more than a fading memory." Raxa's blood boiled at the commander's words. He gathered the last of his strength and spat at the human's feet, his saliva sizzling on the polished floor. "The Riemann spirit will never be broken," he snarled, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We will fight you to the last breath until every last human invader is driven from our worlds." The commander chuckled, a mirthless sound that sent chills rippling down Raxa's spine. "You still don't understand, do you?" he asked, his tone almost pitying. "We are not invaders. We are the rightful heirs to the galaxy, the only species strong enough to claim what is ours by right of conquest." The commander motioned to Kyle, who stepped forward with a cruel smile playing across his lips. "The Reavers were just the beginning," Kyle explained, his voice filled with a perverse pride. "We have other weapons, other abominations that will make your worst nightmares seem like child's play. The galaxy will learn to fear the very mention of humanity's name." Raxa's mind reeled at the implications of Kyle's words. What other horrors did the humans have at their disposal? What chance did the Riemann Empire, already on the brink of collapse, have against such a ruthless and technologically advanced foe? The guards seized Raxa once more, dragging him away from the commander's presence and into the depths of the ship. They hurled him into a cramped, filthy cell, the door slamming shut with a resounding clang. In the days and weeks that followed, Raxa endured a relentless barrage of psychological torture. His captors sought to break his will, to extract every last scrap of information about the Riemann Empire's defenses. They deprived him of sleep, subjected him to eardrum-shattering noises, and pumped his cell full of noxious gases that left him retching and gasping for air. Through it all, Raxor clung to his sanity, his mind retreating to the deepest recesses of his being. He focused on the memories of his fallen comrades, on the pride he had once felt in serving the Riemann Empire. But as the days bled into weeks, he could feel his grip on reality beginning to slip. The whispers of his fellow prisoners, each trapped in their own personal hell, echoed through the corridors of the ship. Their moans and screams formed a chorus of despair and madness, a haunting soundtrack to Raxa's own suffering. But even as his body weakened and his mind threatened to shatter, Raxa refused to give in to despair. He clung to a single, desperate hope, the hope that somewhere out there, in the vast reaches of the galaxy, there were others who would stand against the human tide. Others who would fight to preserve the freedom and dignity of all sentient species, no matter the cost. And so, in the darkness of his cell, Raxa began to plan his escape. He would bide his time, gather his strength, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, he would seek out the allies he needed to stop the human juggernaut before it consumed everything in its path. The road ahead would be long and perilous, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But Raxor was a warrior of the Riemann Empire, a species that had endured countless trials and emerged stronger for it. He would not rest until he had rallied the galaxy against the human threat, until every last world was free from their tyrannical grasp. In the depths of his despair, Raxor found a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light amidst the suffocating darkness. And with that hope, he would forge a new path, a path that would lead him to the very heart of the human empire and the final battle for the fate of the galaxy. The lights flickered, plunging the cell into darkness. The hum of the human ship's engines stuttered and died. Raxa sat bolt upright, his eyes straining against the gloom. The electronic lock on his cell door flashed once, twice, then went dark. Raxa lunged for the door, slamming his shoulder against the metal. It gave way with a groan, swinging open on protesting hinges. The lone guard outside whirled, reaching for his weapon, but Raxa was faster. His fist connected with the guard's jaw with a sickening crunch. The human crumpled, his rifle clattering to the deck. Raxa snatched up the weapon, its weight unfamiliar in his hands. Alarms blared through the corridors, red emergency lights pulsing in the darkness. Raxa sprinted through the ship's bowels, his heart pounding against his ribcage. A human soldier rounded the corner, plasma rifle raised. Raxa fired, the weapon bucking in his grip. The searing bolt caught the soldier in the chest, burning through his armor like paper. He fell, his scream cut short by a gurgle of blood. Raxa fought his way through the cramped corridors, the acrid stench of burnt flesh and ozone filling his nostrils. His stolen rifle grew hot in his hands as he cut down any human foolish enough to stand in his way. He burst into the hangar bay, a cavernous space filled with sleek predatory spacecraft. The pulsing red lights cast eerie shadows across their hulls. Raxa's breath caught in his throat. This was his chance, his one shot at freedom. He sprinted towards the nearest ship, a small, agile fighter craft. His hand reached for the cockpit release, his heart hammering with desperate hope. "Going somewhere, Riemann?" The cold, mocking voice froze Raxor in his tracks. He turned slowly, his grip tightening on the rifle. Kyle emerged from the shadows, his eyes glinting with malice. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Raxor snarled, baring his fangs. "I will not be a pawn in your twisted games any longer, human. I will find a way to stop you, to expose the truth of your species' savagery to the galaxy." Kyle laughed, the sound echoing off the hangar walls. "You're welcome to try, but you'll soon learn that there is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from us. We are the stuff of nightmares, the monsters that lurk in the shadows of every civilization's darkest fears." Raxor raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. Kyle's hand drifted to the hilt of his plasma blade, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Raxa fired, the searing bolt catching Kyle square in the chest. The human staggered back, his armor absorbing the brunt of the blast. Raxa leapt for the fighter, scrambling into the cockpit. His hands flew over the controls, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The engines roared to life, the force of the thrusters slamming Raxor back against his seat. Kyle's face contorted with rage as he unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts at the fleeing ship. The fighter craft lurched and shuddered, warning lights flashing across the console. Raxor pushed the engines to their limit, the hangar bay receding behind him. Point defense turrets swiveled to track his movements, their laser cannons spitting searing beams of light. Raxa jinked and wove, his teeth gritted in concentration. The fighter burst from the human ship, streaking into the inky void of space. Raxa's breath came in ragged gasps, his hands shaking on the controls. He plotted a course for the nearest neutral system, his mind reeling from the implications of what he had learned. The humans were no saviors, but a menace to the galaxy, a savage, unrelenting force that would stop at nothing to dominate all other species. And he, Raxa, might be the only one who could stop them. The battered fighter craft shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere, its hull glowing cherry red from the heat of re-entry. Raxa gritted his teeth, his claws tightening on the controls as he fought to keep the ship stable. The craft bucked and jolted, its engines coughing and sputtering, threatening to give out at any moment. But Raxa refused to yield. He had come too far, endured too much to let a mere machine defeat him now. With a final, Herculean effort, he wrenched the ship back on course, guiding it towards the lush, green surface of the planet below. As the craft punched through the clouds, Raxa's eyes widened in wonder. The world that stretched out before him was a paradise, a far cry from the war-ravaged hellscapes he had grown accustomed to. Dense, verdant jungles blanketed the land, broken only by the glittering expanse of crystal-clear lakes and winding serpentine rivers. For a moment, Raxa allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps here, on this remote, untouched world, he could find the refuge he so desperately sought. A place to gather his strength, to plan his next move against the relentless human juggernaut. But as he brought the ship in for a landing on the outskirts of a small primitive village, Raxa's hope turned to ash in his mouth. The village was a charnel house, its inhabitants slaughtered and left to rot in the sun. Remnants and Krul alike lay strewn about like broken dolls, their bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of human weaponry. Plasma burns seared the flesh of the fallen, their wounds still smoking in the humid air. Gaping, bloody holes punctured their torsos, the edges of the wounds cauterized by the searing heat of human rifles. It was a scene of unimaginable brutality, a testament to the savagery of the human war machine. Raxa stepped out of the ship, his heart heavy with grief and rage. He moved among the bodies, searching for any sign of life, any hint of survivors. But he found only death and silence, the once peaceful village transformed into a graveyard. As he sifted through the rubble, his claws sticky with congealed blood, Raxa's eyes fell upon a strange, pulsing object half buried in the dirt. He dug it out, his breath catching in his throat as he recognized the device. It was a human distress beacon, the kind used by their scouts to call for reinforcements. Raxa's mind raced as the implications of his discovery sank in. The humans were already here on this world. They were using it as a staging ground for their conquest, a hidden base from which to launch their attacks on the unsuspecting galaxy. He had to warn the others, to spread the word of this new threat before it was too late. Raxa turned to leave, his claws tightening around the beacon, but froze as a sound reached his ears. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. He was not alone. Raxa whirled, his hand flying to the plasma pistol at his hip, but it was already too late. A dozen human soldiers emerged from the jungle, their weapons trained on the Riemann warrior. Their faces were twisted into cruel, mocking smiles, their eyes glinting with sadistic glee. And at their head, a familiar figure stepped forward, his plasma blade humming with deadly energy. Kyle's face was a mask of hatred, his eyes blazing with a fury that bordered on madness. "Welcome to our little hunting ground, Raymond," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You didn't think you could escape us that easily, did you?" Raxa's scales bristled, his heart's pounding in his chest. He knew he was outmatched, outnumbered, but he refused to show fear in the face of his enemy. "Now," Kyle continued, his lips curling into a predatory grin, "let's see how long you can last against the real monsters of the galaxy." The humans began to advance, their weapons glowing with barely restrained energy. Raxa's grip tightened on his pistol, his mind racing as he sought for some way out, some means of escape. But there was none. He was trapped, cornered like prey before the hunter. As the first soldier took aim, Raxa knew that his fate was sealed. He would die here on this remote, forgotten world, far from his home and his people, but he would not go quietly into the night. He would fight, to his last breath and beyond. With a roar of defiance, Raxa charged forward, his pistol spitting streams of searing plasma at the advancing humans. The jungle exploded into chaos, the air filled with the screams of the wounded and the dying, the stench of burning flesh and scorched metal. And at the center of it all, Raxa fought, a whirlwind of claws and plasma, determined to take as many of his enemies with him as he could before the end. Raxa's pulse thrummed in his ears as he faced off against Kyle and his human soldiers, their weapons glinting in the harsh alien sunlight. Plasma fire sizzled past his head as he dove for cover behind a crumbling stone wall. He knew the odds were stacked against him, a lone Riemann warrior against a squad of battle-hardened human commandos. But Raxa had not survived this long by surrendering to despair. With a roar that shook the very earth, Raxa burst from cover, his stolen plasma rifle spewing bolts of superheated death. The humans scattered like startled prey, seeking shelter behind trees and boulders as they returned fire. Raxa wove through the deadly fusillade with preternatural grace, his reflexes honed by a lifetime of war. A plasma bolt caught a human soldier square in the chest, burning through his armor like paper. He crumpled to the ground, his dying scream choked off by a gurgle of blood. Another human fell, his helmet shattered by a well-placed shot from Raxa's rifle. But Kyle was not so easily felled. The human commander moved like a wraith, his plasma blade flashing in the gloom of the jungle as he closed the distance to Raxa with terrifying speed. Raxa barely had time to draw his own blade before Kyle was upon him, a whirlwind of slashing plasma and armored fists. Their blades clashed in a shower of sparks, the force of the impact sending shockwaves up Raxa's arms. They traded blows in a deadly dance, each seeking to exploit the other's weaknesses. Raxa's blade scored a glancing hit on Kyle's shoulder, the plasma scorching his armor. But Kyle pressed his advantage, hammering at Raxa's defenses with relentless fury. Raxa felt his strength waning, his muscles screaming with exhaustion. His rifle lay forgotten on the jungle floor, its power cell spent. As Kyle raised his blade for the killing stroke, Raxa braced himself for the end. But the blow never fell. A haunting melody filled the air, an eerie, pulsing rhythm that seemed to reach into Raxa's very soul. The human soldiers faltered, their eyes glazing over as they lowered their weapons. Kyle himself staggered, his plasma blade falling from nerveless fingers. Seizing his chance, Raxa lunged forward, driving his blade through a gap in Kyle's armor. The human commander's eyes widened in shock and agony as Raxa twisted the blade, the searing plasma burning through flesh and bone. With a final rattling gasp, Kyle slumped to the ground, his life bleeding out into the dirt. Raxa turned to face the source of the strange music, his blade held at the ready. There, at the edge of the ruined village, stood a group of cruel warriors, their carapaces pulsing with an otherworldly light. At their head was a figure Raxa knew from legend, a cruel shaman, wielder of ancient psychic arts. The shaman's voice echoed in Raxa's mind, a whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of his being. "You have fought bravely, Remen, but the true enemy is not the humans, but the darkness within us all. Only together can we hope to survive the coming storm." Raxa looked down at Kyle's body, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease swirling in his gut. The shaman was right. The galaxy faced a threat beyond any one species, and Raxa knew he would have to play his part in the battles to come. As the crew gathered around him, their eerie song fading into silence, Raxa cast one last glance at the ruined village behind him. Then, with a heavy heart and a newfound sense of purpose, he turned and followed the crew into the jungle's waiting embrace, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The cruel shaman led Raxa and his warriors through the dense jungle undergrowth, their path illuminated only by the eerie bioluminescent glow of the crew's carapaces. The air grew thick and heavy, the sense of decay and ancient secrets mingling in Raxa's nostrils. As they pressed deeper into the foliage, The trees parted to reveal a sight that stole Raxa's breath. An ancient temple rose before them, its walls covered in strange alien glyphs that seemed to writhe and dance in the shadowy light. The shaman's eyes pulsed with an otherworldly luminescence as he approached the temple's entrance, his clawed hands tracing the intricate patterns carved into the stone. "The secrets of the ages lie within," the shaman whispered, his voice echoing in Raxa's mind. "Tread carefully, for the knowledge we seek may come at a great cost." The cruel warriors pushed open the temple's massive doors, the grating of stone on stone sending shivers down Raxa's spine. They stepped inside, their footfalls echoing in the eerie, oppressive silence. The corridors stretched out before them, twisting and turning like the labyrinthine passages of some great slumbering beast. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the temple, Raxa's senses tingled with a growing sense of unease. The walls pulsed with an unseen energy, the very air crackling with the weight of ancient power. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber, its vaulted ceiling lost in the shadows high above. The walls were lined with advanced technology, the likes of which Raxa had never seen. Sleek, pulsing consoles and shimmering holographic displays, all centered around a massive, thrumming machine that dominated the chamber's center. Raxa's eyes widened in recognition, his breath catching in his throat. This was no mere temple. It was a remnant of a long-forgotten civilization, a species that had reached the pinnacle of technological advancement eons before vanishing into the mists of time. The shaman approached the central machine, his claws skittering over its surface as he worked to decipher its secrets. Raxor, drawn by an inexplicable force, found himself moving towards a small, innocuous device set into the chamber's wall. Its surface was covered in strange alien symbols, glowing with a mesmerizing inner light. Almost as if in a trance, Raxor reached out to brush his fingertips against the device's smooth metallic surface. The instant he made contact, his mind exploded with a rush of images and sensations, a cascade of knowledge and understanding that threatened to sweep him away. He saw the true history of the galaxy unfold before him, the rise and fall of countless civilizations playing out in a dizzying montage of light and sound. He witnessed the birth of stars and the death of worlds, the triumphs and tragedies of 1,000 generations. And then, like a dark shadow falling across the cosmos, he sensed a terrible, inexorable threat lurking at the edges of known space, a force of unimaginable power and malevolence, waiting to devour all in its path. The vision shifted, and Raxa saw the humans, not as the savage conquerors he had once believed them to be, but as mere pawns in a much larger game. Their actions, their very thoughts, were being guided by an unseen hand, a puppeteer pulling the strings from the shadows. And then, in a moment of startling clarity, Raxor saw himself, a tiny, insignificant mote adrift in the vast expanse of the universe, and yet he knew with a sudden, unshakable certainty that he had a role to play in the coming crisis, a purpose that would shape the fate of the galaxy itself. As abruptly as it had begun, the vision faded, and Raxa found himself back in the temple chamber, his hand still resting on the now lifeless device. The shaman was at his side, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "I have seen the truth," the cruel whispered, his voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion. "You know what we must do." Raxa nodded, his mind still reeling from the weight of the revelation. He knew with a grim certainty that the path ahead would be fraught with peril and sacrifice, that he would be tested in ways he had never been before. But as he looked around at the faces of the cruel warriors, their eyes shining with a fierce determination, he felt a sense of unity and purpose that transcended the boundaries of species and culture. They would stand together, not as Riemann or cruel or human, but as living beings fighting for the survival and freedom of all. Raxa's gaze met the shaman's, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew the odds they faced, the sacrifices that would be required, but they also knew that they had no choice but to fight, to stand against the coming darkness no matter the cost. The shaman turned to the others, his voice ringing out in the ancient chamber. "Come, my brothers, the galaxy awaits. Let us begin the long march to war." As they filed out of the temple, Raksur, "You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time."